So welcome back, everybody, to the Contractor Commute. And
What's up, guys?
today we are kind of hitting a fun topic about red flag clients, really problematic clients. These are the people that we don't want to work for, that sometimes we, along the way of getting through the introduction and starting to get to know that person, you get some red flags along the way.
Yeah, we had a listener ask for this topic. So it's a fun one. I'm excited to
Yes.
dive into it.
So you've sold a lot of things, Kinsey. I mean, have you come across times when you're starting to get some hints from somebody? I mean, what did that look like?
Yeah, I think I don't have that as much, or ever really here at Congenius, because really we're like, hey, sign up for a free trial, like you decide for, you know what I mean? It's a little bit less of the consultative business side in that. But at my previous job, I had a couple really problematic clients and clients that I ignored red flags for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like so eager to get the job. Like I think one was during COVID. So I'm like, I literally don't care where this business comes from because
we'll work for the devil.
Which is a really scary place to be. And I know we'll dive into that a little bit more too. But I remember like two clients coming to the top of my mind, and they were just the most demanding clients. Like even before we had a partnership in place, or like,
so you hadn't even had a sale yet.
Even had a sale.
Yep.
But I was like, well, I'm a salesperson. I need to sell, like that's what I was thinking. And I mean, I got blown up on my phone. Like they just would text me like it was the most urgent thing. Like someone had died, It was like, here's 9 texts in a row.
Level
hey,
10, everything.
What's up? Like, are you available? Like, what, you know what I mean? And it's like, no, I'm actually not available. I'm in meetings or whatever. And I'm like, this is a marketing conversation. It's not a like, I need an ambulance, type of conversation. And they were exactly the same way whenever they became clients. And I just ignored it because I was like, I need the sale, or I need the business to, whatever. And so I think it's really natural to do, but I tried not to do that anymore. And I tried to say no to things like that. But I certainly had a couple scenarios that were demanding clients, and you could never make them happy. And they were my lowest paying clients.
Yep. Isn't that something? Yeah. And I've had similar experiences where some of the least profitable, worst projects we worked on were also the most difficult people to work for.
Yeah.
They, life revolved around them.
Yep.
Whether that was Sunday evening at 9 p.m. or, in like you said, a lot of times it was everything was level 10 priority. Yep. One of the things that's been a life lesson that I think that I'm learning more and continue to try to hit home on is that we can trust people to be who they are. And it took me a very long time to actually accept that fact because I always wanted to sort of project on other people that, well, surely they didn't mean what they said. Maybe they had a bad day, like making excuses for that kind of behavior. Like, well, maybe they got something going on and they're like they're just all of the, I think it's kind of the trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, which I think can be a good thing, where we want to be kind, we want to be able to be gracious to another person. But at the same time, we can trust people to be who they are. In a sense, and a good thing too. We work together as a team. We know the rest of our team, their behavior, of how they can act. We can count on them in certain situations to act a certain way. If something goes down, and you can count on them to be, honest and hardworking. And similarly, negative behavior, it's like, no, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's a good observation. I think though, like a lot of people, or at least me, I'm like, oh, they can change. I can change that. Like they'll be different as part of this. Like we were kind of joking earlier. It's like in marriage, right? Yep. You're like, they won't do that when we're married, or they won't, you know what I mean? Like things like that. So I think people are just that way too. Of like just, not everybody's like giving benefit of the doubt. I know not everybody's that way, but I think we like to. Yep. As much as possible.
You're dating and you're like, oh, I mean, it's so many times in the relationships I've had before I met my wife, where I was married to the idea more of what that person could be, as opposed to who they really were. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, they're just so great. And I'm like, no, well, not really. I just made that kind of illusion in my head. Yeah. And I think we can do that with people.
Totally.
We can just ignore the red flags. We want to be kind and be like, yep. And then the danger about that too, this is a two-way relationship. We would need to remember that we're vetting that person as much as they're vetting us. And it needs to work both ways. Yep. And as soon as you sense this all one direction where the pressure's all on you to meet their expectations and there's not any vetting and they almost expect you, like you will do what we say, that's a big red flag.
Yeah. No, that's true. It makes me think too, like I know we talked in our last episode about sales and marketing. Yeah. But I'm like, even just saying like, hey, if you feel any red flags along the way as we're like as part of the sales process, like giving permission to your client, we kind of talked about that on the last episode as well, but being like, hey, if you're ever feeling any red flags along the way, like you have permission to like call them out, let me know, just being the recipient of that, so that way it hopefully opens the door for that for you too. Anyway, it's just so do you have a story? Do you have a story of a problematic client?
Fortunately, I haven't worked for a whole lot of people.
Well, that's good.
that were problematic.
It's good.
That were problematic clients. There's probably half a dozen of them. One particular story was where a guy had called me up. So I had a cabinet shop as attached to our remodel business.
Okay.
And it was sort of my pet thing. I love woodworking. I love building pretty things. And so it was this extension of the business. It didn't really make us money. It was just more or less.
It's a hobby. But business.
Yeah, right. Business, yeah. I mean, I put a buttload of money into this, like setting up the shop and everything. Yeah, right. So, but we had this shop that we could do some really cool things with, all of this custom woodwork. So when a high-end job would come along and somebody would ask for something, we'd like, yeah, we can go do that in the shop. It was really cool.
That's cool.
Never made a dime doing that part of it. But anyway. So this guy calls me up and he said, hey, last minute, we're trying to get into our house, and he's doing all the project himself. And as soon as one of the big there's multiple red flags that come out of this one.
Can't wait.
One of the things that he initially talked about was how much he didn't value the service either. Like, you can do that real quick. I'm going to drop a bunch of cabinet doors off there, and all I need is them finished. And he said,
simple.
Simple job. It's, nothing to it. I'll drop the stain off. I'll drop the finish. You guys just finish it for me.
Like he's an expert too,
right?
Right,
100%. And then he said, don't worry about sanding any of them. Like like there was all kinds of cross-grain scratches in them from the shop that made them. And I'm like, so I'm thinking to myself, there's no way we're going to just throw stain on all of this stuff.
Right.
So I had a guy sanding doors for 3 or 4 days, getting them all looking good.
Wow.
Didn't value that at all. Next thing I know, so first off, it was cheap, right? The first red flag was he didn't value what we were going to do for him. It was just like, you throw that together. And then the other thing was the time frame. He wanted it done yesterday.
Yeah, it's urgent.
Yep.
Everything's
urgent. That's where we started off with that. Your problematic client started off with like everything is level 10, had to be done yesterday. And it's like, well, that's not your problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like they're asking you,
exactly
for work.
So, and then I think the other part about it too is when you have a client that is the expert in everything, that's, I think, a red flag too, because it's not that I'm trying to portray myself as the expert in every situation either. But when somebody tells you, this is how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
You're going to finish it this way, use this product and everything like that. They're telling me exactly how they want it done. They don't value what we're doing. They want it done yesterday. So anyway, we ignored all 3 red flags.
Yeah. Well, at that point, you're like, well, why do you need me anyways? You know how to do this, right? Anyway.
It's so easy.
But you ignored them, yeah.
Ignored them. So first problem happened where he said, we want these dark. He was a very dark stain, and he said, we want them very dark. You can't make them dark enough.
Okay.
So we got all done with it.
It's black.
Basically it's like an ebony type of stain.
Okay. Yep.
So we get all done with it. He takes one door back. He says, oh, my wife hates it. It's too dark.
Oh my gosh.
So he brings them all back to the shop. We strip all these doors down, redo them, get the stain color right, get them all back to him. That guy never paid me one dime for that entire job. We did the job twice for him. And basically, and you come to find out this guy's got all kinds of other people that never, he never paid either. It was just right from the beginning, this is the problematic client.
Yeah.
So you ignore some of the red flags. Yeah. Well, there's multiple lessons here we can talk about. Sure. But I think one of the things that this type of person kind of is used to doing is kind of manipulating situations like that too by making everything urgent.
Yeah.
That sometimes you miss some process that you sometimes would. What you normally would do.
Yeah.
And normally you would say, let's make a contract. Let's go ahead and talk about what this would cost.
Yeah.
All we did was bill him like straight up hours for one time of doing the job.
Wow.
And he never paid that even. So anyway, I'm not bitter at the guy. It might seem like it a little bit, but I mean,
it's just a story.
It's a story. Yeah.
From a while ago.
But nonetheless, I mean, it was painful because this is several $1,000s of income that we just work for free.
Right.
My entire team is involved with this, working around the clock. I mean, personally, I'm spending time away from my family to get this job done urgently and never get paid a dime.
Yeah, that's hard to
It
swallow.
really hurts.
That's hard to swallow.
Okay, no, I am bitter.
Yeah. It's really come back up. We're going to take a break.
Yeah, right, exactly. We'll be right back, folks. No. I mean, I think because I can learn a lesson in all of that too, becomes a little less painful. It's sort of like obviously that guy is, he did something wrong.
Right.
But also, I can also learn something from it. And I think it's very hard when you have somebody that wrongs you to not be self-reflective and say, what could I do better in that situation?
Yeah.
Because he did something terribly wrong, and I couldn't think of what we could have done better. Like we did this twice. We sent out a great product.
Yeah.
Took out all the things. We went above and beyond, did it in tight schedule, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I thought there's nothing he can come back and say, you did it, I'm not going to pay you.
Terrible job. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So for a situation like that, for somebody just a complete crook,
Mm-hmm.
but the same, so that I could get all worked up about saying, what a crook, I'll sue you, I'm going to, blow your house up, like all of those kinds of things that people they talk that way.
Yeah.
That, a lot of times I've had contractors, well, come back and, we can slash your tires. I mean,
Oh my gosh,
that kind of thing can happen where it just builds up instead of being like, what can we learn from that lesson and say, okay, let's make sure that doesn't happen again. And so I ignored 3 red flags.
Yeah, that's good.
And paid for it.
Yeah. And you learned other lessons too.
Yeah, I did learn other lessons. Yes.
That's cool. So I think we hinted at some of this in some of the stories, but let's just define what does a problem client even mean? I'm sure everybody has horror stories that are going off like alarms sirening in their minds right now.
Right.
But maybe break down okay, what are we defining as like a problem client today?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other things, but maybe list off.
The top things that come to mind was if somebody doesn't pay you. I mean, we talked about that guy, right? The demanding. And I think there's this level of respect that should be there where
that's good.
Where they respect your talent, your time. I think that's a big part of it. And then at the tail end of all of it, when you get it all wrapped up, is this somebody that you are glad you worked for? Do you have a referral out of it? Is it somebody is it a job that you actually want to be, that you're proud that you did? Do you have some work product when you're done and saying, that was really cool? Because some of these projects you'd work on, there was never that opportunity at the tail end of it. It was just like, put some garbage together, get done with it, get out of here. We won't pay you. I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's that cheap, get in, get out. We don't care about you as a person. So at the tail end of it, you feel like rubbish because nobody's telling you, wow, great job. You never had an opportunity to excel or do anything well because you weren't getting paid enough in the first place.
Right. I think too, in your story, you're even clients who are testing you along the way.
Yes.
It's probably a problematic client, and might be something because it sounds like that's what happened. Even up front in that first conversation, he was testing you based on all the things he knew potentially as part of that. So
that's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective, whether or not he was probing. Then maybe that's back to my giving somebody the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah,
even
there was more red flags.
Even straight up crooks.
No.
Yeah, there probably was more to it.
Yeah. So okay, let's dive into then, what the red flags of a problematic client could be. And I know again in our stories, we mentioned a few, but let's kind of break that down a little bit.
The number one red flag that I've seen is the negativity of how somebody communicates about other people. And if you find somebody that's a negative person, they always are even the way they talk about their spouse, their kids, their coworkers, their employees, their boss, whatever else. If everything is negative, you can expect that to come around to you.
Right.
Because it's just everything in life is negative. So it's like they're living in a negativity bubble. Everything around them is somebody else's fault.
Yep.
And I think it's a really dangerous person to work for. Yeah. And I think it's I've seen it so many times where everything around that person. In another story was when we never even got a chance to work for this guy. This is one of these upfront kind of things where we did a little bit of my salesperson went out, did a consultation, went through the project, and, it seemed like maybe it might be a fit, but their budget was low. So I think that's this segues into the other red flag, and this is how they talk about money.
Yeah. Okay.
So right away it was cheap. What can we get done for $50,000?
Yeah.
And constantly pushing the envelope of what they could fit into that number, as though it was the more they could try to cram in there, the more we would actually do. It's not like you don't negotiate.
Just trying to get add-ons.
Yeah, I have $100. I need more. So
right. No, that's good. I think one thing too is expectations of people, and trying to uncover what those are early on. A red flag would be just crazy expectations, and I think sometimes we can get in a tricky spot whenever we're, in the sales process of things. Because I think a lot of these red flags come up in that process because it's your first time meeting them. You're vetting each other like we talked about. But if you're over-promising in part of that, and this is kind of a tangent, but I'm I think that we could have a tendency of producing red flag clients too. Yeah. In the way we sell and the way we talk.
Such a great point.
And so that's something to just be aware of as well. Of and I think you don't learn that until you reflect, to your point, and kind of have a couple experiences probably that did that. But I'm just thinking back on my story, and I'm I certainly oversold what was going to happen, even just based on my actions of responding quickly or to the urgent request. I enabled them to continue doing that. And so I kept, this, I kept the red flags alive, I guess. I created a problem, essentially.
So on the flip side, if you had say, well, I'm not responding to your 9 p.m. Sunday afternoon text, And Monday morning at 8 a.m. or whatever, he replied to it.
Yep, a boundary is set.
Yep, boundary was set, and then they might have been like, "Oh, these people aren't for me. They're just not responsive."
Which is great.
100%, right?
That's a win for both of you.
100%,
Yeah.
right?
So
Right. I think there's another layer of when you're talking about creating the red flag client is because the demands are there. We think to ourselves, maybe an element of pride to it, like we're going to be better than the last guy.
Totally.
Because they're talking about, man, the last guy I had in here was terrible, and
Yep.
and they might even talk about, well, we never paid him. That should be huge.
Yeah.
When people talk that way, when they don't talk like, well, we want to do the fair thing by them. I had this painter work on our house, and so this is a project for just me personally.
Yep.
This guy comes out, we hired him, he had good reviews on Google and all the rest of them. We had just a couple of rooms to paint. It was a house we're getting ready to sell. He came out, was there for maybe a day, and he said, I'm all done painting the house.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, there's no way. We lived in the house for 5 years. Like, you have to patch holes. And
there's a lot to do.
Yeah, we talked about all that up front. We want this thing looking good. We're ready to sell it. Nothing got filled. Nothing got, like the house looked, the paint job was terrible. So what I did was I said, okay, I'm not happy with the job. I need to get somebody else to do the job. And I said, what's a fair thing at this point to do? And he said, well, just pay me for the day I was there. So I paid him $500 for the day he was there. And he didn't feel like he got ripped off.
Yeah, that's good.
And I could move away from another several $1,000s going to this guy to complete the job.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of a situation where I can hold my head up high at the end of it. And I think when you pick up on signs from people where if they have something as an excuse for not paying a person and they say, well, I'm not going to pay that fool.
Right.
Run.
Yeah.
Because they're going to do this. They're going to find a reason not to pay you.
Yeah.
And this is a big red flag.
Yeah.
On the money side.
I think too, though, like there's probably a lot of clients who are not as kind as you were in that scenario.
Well, good
like
point.
To the contractor on the job. Like, I think, it's like we're in such a consumer culture, and if my food's not right, I'm sending it back.
Yeah.
I'm not paying for it.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the culture we live in.
Yeah.
And so that's hard to
Yeah.
to find,
That's a good
to
point.
even get paid for
That's
your
a good
day.
point.
You know what I mean?
Right,
Like I
right.
just wonder
Yeah.
how often that scenario that you just said actually happens.
Well, I guess while I'm on my high horse, I can give you a scenario about something where I didn't do that, though.
Okay.
I had a guy in our
humble
office
yourself.
building.
I'm just kidding.
Get off that mighty horse, will you? Where I actually didn't pay somebody, but actually what I did was he had come out, done a job, and it was a HVAC situation where something didn't work. He came out, sent a bill for $350. Whatever he did had no value to me whatsoever. Nothing worked. He came, fixed a problem the wrong way. I had to go find somebody else to still do the same thing.
Pay more to get it fixed. Yeah.
So he came back, sent me a bill for the time that he was there, and I said, I don't know what you think is fair here, but I didn't have any value from what you did. And he said, well, don't worry about it. So I gave him some agency in it, though, as opposed to just telling him, listen, I'm not going to pay you for that. And I think maybe that's how you could handle something with the painting situation, too, where the guy's like, because I didn't have any value from the guy.
Yeah.
So I did flush $500.
Yeah.
So is that right? I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think it's very kind. So I think it is. I'm like, I don't know if I'm that kind.
Yeah. Well, and there's probably many times
to
where I wasn't. But I guess the point being, though, where somebody is not workable a situation where they're using an excuse to just rip somebody off. I think that would be the red flag.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. That's good. And, we talked about respect, too, and, talked about respecting time, I think, with your story a little bit ago, too, and just, like, the demanding nature of when texts are coming through and things like that, being urgent, those kinds of things, I think, are huge red flags that get ignored a lot, probably.
Yes.
Another kind of red flag we talked about.
You're the worker. Get over here. You know what I mean? Like if you get that kind of attitude,
right,
of that you're a second-class citizen as a part of in your trade. I'm a doctor. Get over here and do what I tell you to do.
Totally.
Like, that's not
flag.
good. Yeah, it's a red flag.
For sure. I think too, like how the spouse relationship is. I know we've talked about that a little bit, but just like if the spouses aren't on the same page, depending on the project, like if it's just probably every project though, if it's the home, specifically, or the owners of a commercial project, or you know what I mean, like something like that. If you got to make sure you have all the decision makers as part of the conversation, so that way you can pick up on both ways of red flags.
Yeah.
Basically, you need to psychoanalyze everyone. Is what we're saying. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, my dad had told me the situation where he had a couple together. My dad's a builder and remodeler, and he was talking about meeting with. This is consultation, so pre-sale, where the couple was asking him, and they had two different opinions, and they wanted him to be the mediator of saying, "What do you think?"
Yeah.
And he was wise in the situation of just like, I don't have an opinion on this. There's lots of ways to look at this.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, right. But I've had a couple of times where that spousal thing did create problems because then, the wife wants this kind of oven and he doesn't, and you're kind of get caught in the middle of it. So yeah, no, it is a good point.
Well, and it's risky to give away like design services for free. That's what that makes me think of like if there's two people on the same page, then you need to be selling a design package or find an interior designer or something like that so that they can get on the same page.
This probably just goes back to even just a good business practice of having everything defined. And and that's going to sort of bring to light any disagreements between the parties that are involved.
True.
I mean, this could be as simple as like if you're working for a church, there could be all kinds of opinions about how it's getting finished out. If you're working for like you brought up a commercial context where the business owners aren't agreed on how it should be done, the spouse is not agreed. I mean, like there's a lot of situations where the parties that you're working for could run you different directions and say, what were you thinking when you did that? And I was like, well, I was told that.
Right.
So having some documentation in place is wise.
Yeah. Well, because you're, for our listeners, like you're doing the job, you're fulfilling the job, you're doing what's being told, like things like that. But if it's not defined or there's two different opinions, then it's like, well, you're not doing the job to the other client, you know what I mean? Or the other party in this, like they don't
Paint
feel
colors.
that way. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which can be minor, but it's major work, that's being done. So.
Yeah, it's a good call out.
Okay, so dive into some motivations by like why we ignore.
Well, I think you hit one earlier, and that was just wanting to sell.
Yeah.
Where
needing money.
Yeah. Well, yes. Imagine that. You're like, well, some clients better than no client. Not wrong. One thing I learned the hard way is staying home and making nothing is better than going to work and losing money.
Yeah, that's hard to like break that down. I mean, like say it again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, cause it's true.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's hard to like get behind and actually like feel and know, like to know that.
And maybe it just comes back to like, what is the pain involved of ignoring the red flags and getting involved with somebody you probably against your better judgment get involved with? Well, in one situation, I had my entire shop crew working for a guy that never paid them. I'm like, so here we are, there's our this is our time. I'm paying those guys to do work for somebody that's never going to pay. So I mean, like that's.
And you could have been making money on a different job.
Exactly.
Too.
Yeah, right. So I mean, that's not worth it.
Right.
Now we couldn't have known that who would have done that up front necessarily, but the red flags were such where we're saying, question mark, should we do this?
Yeah.
And you want to be like, oh, well, help a guy out and that kind of thing. And I mean, I think that's dangerous. And so, yeah, we could need money or a sense of pride on the line too. Like we always keep our people happy. And this is kind of like the Sam Walton with Walmart approach where it's like the customer's always right. I get what he was saying in the sense of being like, you want to listen to your customer. You want to
provide great service.
Yes. You want to have this mentality of being like, I don't want to assume they're wrong in a situation. So he was humble about it.
Yeah.
But I think where we disagree is you could take that too far. And when it comes right down to it, if somebody gave you a hard time as a customer, I'm going to choose you over the customer every day of the week. Now, it's not that we can't analyze and say, could we have done something better?
Right.
But when it comes down to, like, customer's not always right.
Right. True.
Yeah. And there's sometimes the customer's very wrong.
Yeah. That's so true.
Yeah.
I think, too, like being dismissive, about like from a motivation behind ignoring it standpoint, like a lot of times you mentioned that too earlier of just like assuming that it's going to be better, like being dismissive of the little things, ignoring the red flag, like that's sometimes a natural tendency, I think, with people.
Yep. And I think the flip side would be somebody being overly analytical as well and just saying, like they're seeing red flags where there aren't any as well. And I think that comes back to a good process. If you have a good process in place, it's going to really bring to light.
Sure.
I think that was really what you're bringing up before as well of just it's going to bring to light those red flags if you're having a good process in place. This is how it's supposed to work. I'm not going to answer your text at 9 p.m.
Right.
So therefore, you're gonna weed out some people that otherwise would have, or you give them a bid for full price and you tell them, and they say, well, can you do it for less? And you say, well, I wish I could, but you have to do it that way.
Not a good fit. Yeah.
Right.
It's an interesting point about the process side of it of like, if you don't have a process, then there's no time to vet it. If you're just sending a text that's like, yeah, I can do that on Friday for X amount of dollars, like, there's no way you get to know who you're working for, so without having a consultation or you know what I mean? And I know you need to cover those costs somewhere. Like that would obviously increase your costs, if you're doing those things, but you're not allowing yourself to actually see what the red flags are if you don't have a process at all.
Yeah.
Because you're not meeting them, or you're not vetting them, or you're not having the conversation with the partners or the spouses or whoever it may be. So it's interesting.
And with all of that effort we put into trying to spot red flags and doing something about it, I think there are either opportunities for people to slip through, or if we do ignore them, I think just not to be like there are ways of potentially salvaging something as well.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
I've had a couple situations. One where I was actually the only time I was sued as a part of doing construction work was where we had this project. We could never get off of the job. The job could never end. I was sick of change ordering things out. You could never finish anything there. It was, can you install one exterior light? So I get the electrician out there and we put one light in and he'd be looking at the next day and say, you know what, we really need 6 more.
It's handy.
The electrician was just there the day before. We could have put in 12 lights if he wanted. So he put in 6 more. And then it was very hard to please the guy. Yeah. And so at some point, and maybe I could have done this better, but I've essentially told him, I kind of fired my client. Essentially said, I'm really kind of done working for you. Yeah. He got mad, took me to court about it and had some little petty things that were little issues. Yeah. Judge saw through it. And it was one of those things where, but nonetheless, I had to be willing to go that far with it where even at the risk of a lawsuit, I'm just saying, I can't do anything. I've tried my best. I try to be patient, try to work through these things, spent weeks and weeks trying to close out this thing and just can never get it done. Yeah.
We
did our best. Yeah. And so the funny thing was, and this is probably a little bit of a rabbit trail, but let's just dive right into those holes. So we end up, I get the, sheriff come out and, you get this notice. We go to get into court and the judge says, well, a lot of these things are so tricky. He said, she said, and can you guys work this out? Yeah. So he said, we're taking a recess. This is because they had all the other things going on. We never, that was the introduction to this. Yep. So I get with him. I say, okay, well, what's going on? Is something we do? And he started going through the whole list of, and none of it was making any sense. None of it you could really, it was so bizarre even to me. And I just said, hey, can we just let's just let the judge solve this one for us, because I don't know, And at that point, even if the judge said, listen, you owe this guy $3,000, I would have just paid it and we would have moved on. You know what I mean? Like it would have been way cheaper to just do that. But anyway, the judge kind of he saw through the situation and dismissed it, and that was that. But I guess the point being is sometimes we just have to be willing to just call it somewhere with somebody that is just demanding and. I guess the flip side of that, though, is where the lesson where I think it's very easy to miss, and I kind of hinted on this earlier, is where we can miss the things we could have done better because we can look at what the other person's doing wrong and just say, well, that's just terrible what they're doing to me. Yep. And instead of just thinking, well, what could I have done better in this situation? And what I did reflect on is I didn't set change orders up front with this guy and just being able to say, okay, that's going to cost this much more and let's get that paid right now and then we'll schedule that. We'll do it. And then he maybe would have valued things more. It was more or less just saying it was more like time and materials for the extras. Yep. And so he'd get these bills and then, so it would maybe it would have worked out differently from that standpoint of just setting some expectations and maybe spending more time where he and his wife could get together with something and say, okay, the goal here is to get the gutters right. Yep. Okay. We've been out twice. We've got a great gutter guy, number one. He's going to solve everything for you, but I want to get it done today. Okay, so let's talk about all the different issues you could potentially have here. Yeah. And so maybe more communication. Sure. Maybe that could have helped.
Yeah. Or you can even, I'm wondering, like if you are getting kind of stuck in some of those handyman type jobs where it's like just the one and done things, like either having minimums for like, hey, to come to your house, period, I have a minimum for this set. And I know this is more like billing and estimating, that we're talking about. Or like, hey, let's come up with a plan for like, I'm going to be here for a day. What are all the things that I can do for a day? You know what I mean? Like just to your point of like having a plan around some of
this
those
was
things.
a several $100,000 job that just kind of wound down into handyman stuff, that it was just at the tail end of it where we just couldn't wrap it up. Yeah, it was, where it was just, well, this, and the other thing. And, and eventually just got to the point where, what are we going to do about it? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So we've talked about what are red flag clients, all those things. Let's like go into like if you actually find yourself working for a red flag client or a problematic client, what do you do? Because it's going to happen likely at some point. Yeah. You will ignore it. We've talked about some stories where that happened, for both of us. But, what I guess kind of in tying it all together, like what happens when you actually say yes to a red flag client? Like kind of walk us through that. From your perspective. One of the things we could start off with is kind of reflect back to the beginning of the journey. And so the problem client, did it start off with red flags or did it kind of just sort of evolve into that? Yeah. Because sometimes it's more ownership. We have more ownership in that than we think we do. Sure. I think of an example of somebody I know where he had done a project and there was something that went sort of sideways during the job. Like something went wrong. They had a water issue. And so basically the client, as soon as mistrust gets introduced in the situation, where suddenly that client's thinking they don't have the same level of respect for you anymore. They're thinking, man, they should have never let that happen. Right. And so things are going sideways.
They start doubting.
Doubting, and then the next thing you do wrong is now 10 times worse.
compiling.
And
Yeah,
next thing
yeah.
you know, you just can't get paid at the tail end of it. So
Right.
it wasn't necessarily the fact that you're working with them for the wrong person. It's just the trust got broken.
Yep.
And I had one job like that too,
That's
where
hard.
got to the tail end of it, and I was thinking, man, there's just terrible people. But it was like, well, there were a lot of mistakes along the way.
For sure. And then,
I needed to
breaks
own
trust
those.
every time.
Yeah, and I think it was very hard for my team to hear that. They're like, "What do you mean? You know, like these." Yeah, there was a level of like defensiveness of like, we did so many nice things for those people, and like, you know, how dare they? And I think we have to get past that sometimes. So I think that's number one, is just go back to the beginning of the journey and say, what did this really start off with? A bunch of red flags where this person was really, you know, how they spoke about money, or was it really, did we introduce this ourselves? Did we create one like you brought up earlier?
Yeah.
But if it truly was where we ignored the red flags, we got into a situation we didn't want to be a part of, I think sometimes we have to realize there's more exit paths than we realize.
Totally.
Sometimes we just say, you know, it's sort of like dating somebody you don't want to be with. Like, you can say no. Like, you can say, like, this isn't going to work. And sometimes we just have to be like, you know, this isn't working for either one of us. What's fair in this whole situation? Like, you're not happy with me, I'm not happy with you, and you know, let's try to make something work in the tail. Let's try to be fair about this. We don't hate each other.
Right. Yeah. I think like one strategy too would just be like, hey, try to reset expectations. Like, that's a possibility. Like, hopefully you've set them in the front, but if you haven't, like, that'd be another strategy too. Like,
how would you see that working out? I'm not tracking with you there.
I think like if you are working for a red flag client and you're like, man, they're being demanding, they're being, you know, all these things as part of the process, like having a conversation, actually like asking them to be open and honest about, hey, like I'm at home with my family nights and weekends. I'm really needing to have some structure to when we're communicating, like just being open about like where you're at with that, and resetting the expectations just from like a boundaries standpoint is kind of where I'm seeing that. Like, that's an option, you know, like being communicative and upfront about it versus just like piling it down, I think is an option for everybody. And I think doing that in a way to where it's respectful and it's kind and it's honoring, you know, those are important things. And I think that can build some trust if it's been broken too.
So you're being proactive in the sense of instead of reactive to everything the client does. You're just saying, okay, here's how this should go down. I think you bring up a great point to segue into that. A lot of times you're educating people as well on what things should look like. Yeah. You know, many times we have more experience than the people we're working for on how something's supposed to work. And so, and when we're not communicative and say, okay, typically this is how this process works, this is the way the tail end of it works. You know, I had one, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but one guy had told me that he tries to set the negative expectations for the client right off, you know, where it's
a good episode.
He's just basically saying, you know what, you might hate me in the middle of this, but we're going to get to the end. You're going to love the final product. You know, it's tough. Remodeling's tough. Building is tough. Like, there's a lot of things, and we just work through it all, and we're going to be there for you. And, you know, so essentially acknowledging that things can be stressful. You're in people's homes. You're in their places of business. I mean, a lot of times people have all the other things going on in life they're stressed about, and sometimes that just spills over into conversations. And to just be patient with that, but at the same time, letting people know things can be negative. And that can be okay.
It's good.
So, it's kind of just segueing to your point.
Oh,
I think you hit it.
Yeah.
Oh.
And saying no to people you can fire. You can fire them if it's too, being able to say no, I think.
I did like what you said about being gracious, though, where we don't let pride take over in the situation where we're just telling somebody, you know, listen, you know, how we do it is important.
Right. Yeah.
Because we could want to get in there and just tell them, you know, how it is.
Oh, it's so easy.
That's so tempting.
Yeah, it is. But I think you can restore some negative things if you actually treat it in a way that is gracious and honoring.
One of my life lessons is when something is negative, emotionally charged situation, regardless of what that is to try to leave the emotion out in my response to it and always just deal with whatever the facts of the situation are. Yeah. Why are you smiling?
I'm just smiling because there's been moments where us working together where it's like a heated, you know, like, I don't know. I think it's funny.
Well, I guess part of that is why I want to be able to look back at something later and be able to have, be able to say, you know, I think I did the right thing in that situation. Not feel like, man, I shouldn't have flown off the handle. Like, I mean, it's really hard to take that stuff back. Yeah. And so I think that was kind of, you know, so many things I can look back at both directions of just feeling really heated, sending somebody a nasty email, you know, a supplier or whatever. Listen, you guys screwed up. This is terrible. Better not happen again. Yeah. Or sending somebody an email and just saying, you know what, this is the problem. Yeah. You know, and this is what it's costing my business. And, you know, what do you guys think the solution is? Yeah. Totally different.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's like sleep on it,
Well, that's so good.
sleep on it or reflect on it before,
Yes, right. Not
that's,
just
that's life lessons
right, exactly.
with your spouse. I'm just
Right,
kidding,
exactly. We're gonna deal with this now. We're so dealing with
I
this.
tend to be that way more than my
Yeah.
husband, and he likes to reflect on it, and I'm
Yeah.
like, no, we're gonna hash it out. Let's talk
Mary's
about it
very
now.
good about
Let's,
that too, where she's being like, she's very, we're
better
very
about
good
that.
spouses. I mean,
yeah, maybe, yeah, for sure.
She's very kind about things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so good. But
Yeah.
cool. What are your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I think there's really the importance of recognizing how important it is to really deal with the red flags and process them. And so I like what you said earlier about making sure that you actually give yourself enough bandwidth to get to know somebody well enough to recognize whether or not you want to work for that person. And I think we have to treat this very seriously, because I think we can have a lot of pain later because we just ignored things that were going on. And I think really the final thought for me is really we can trust people to behave the way they are. There's a story, it's a fictional thing, but essentially a scorpion comes up to a frog along the banks of a river and says, I need a ride across the river. And the frog says, no, you'll sting me. And the scorpion says, well, what's the point of that? We'll both drown if I sting you.
Right.
The frog's like, oh, that make a lot of sense. Hop aboard. Halfway across, the scorpion stings the frog.
Right.
And so as they're drowning, the frog says, why'd you do that? And the scorpion's like, well, it's my nature to sting. And I think a lot of times we don't recognize how deep-seated certain patterns of behavior are, and we're not going to change it. And I know we want to be able to be there for somebody, and I hate to even say that, but I think you can, to protect your business and protect your reputation,
Right.
I think we have to just recognize the fact that people are going to be who they are, and we don't have to be a fit for everybody.
Yeah,
and sometimes somebody else with a different perspective or different kind of take on things, an ideal fit client for them might be a total disaster for you. So
yeah. I think though, to get to the point that we're talking about, you do have to come to the point where you're like, I know I don't have to say yes to every job.
Yes.
And I know that it would be better if I didn't work for this person because I can find another job that does, or staying home would be better.
Don't be desperate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true. But you have to arrive to that place. Otherwise, I think you're going to ignore the red flags along the way. Always.
And I think just really making a habit out of it.
Right.
Maybe if you're early on in business, maybe writing down what some of those red flags look like, because
it's good.
Sometimes we don't even see them as red flags. When somebody starts talking about money and how cheap can we get this done, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Or they start talking about dismissively about the people they've worked for in the past, or negatively about all the people around them. There's just jerks around everywhere. That's a red flag.
Yeah.
How they speak about other people in their life. I think there's these things really kind of accumulate. And when you start seeing more than one, even you're saying, even one is problem enough. But
yeah.
And then maybe asking qualifying questions so we don't get too judgmental.
For
Being
sure.
like, when you're saying cheap, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, this has been fun.
Fun.
Yes.
Yeah, hopefully it was helpful.
Yes.
Comment, rate it.
Love to hear some of your red flag, kind of how you process that stuff.
Yeah, let us know some of your stories and what you learned from them. It'd be cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
See you
guys.
guys.